All right, I'll give everybody a few minutes to come in. Let me add some notes in here. Hello, all. Welcome to office hours. What is today? April 23rd. Wow. April 23. Okay. Wow. Welcome. There's way more people in here than usual. Hi, I am Jamie Cohen. I'm starting this a little early. So I'm going to give everybody a few minutes to walk their way in. But as with any office hours that I do or any live stream, if you have any questions or you want me to talk about anything, please add it to the chat. The chat is not archived, so I will read out some of the questions that you may have. But I'd also love to know where you're from, what you're up to, how you came to find the stream, and what you'd like to hear about. Because today's going to be like a two-parter. Today I'm going to talk about trends and old school things, which is I'm just fascinated by what's going on right now. And I also do want to talk about responsibly. I want to talk about the Palantir manifesto that was released the other day. It seems like Tuesdays are not great days anymore. And it's one of those things that we're just going to have to deal with, I think, moving forward. So we'll get this stream started. Let me put on make sure nobody contacts me in the middle of this. Okay, so welcome to Office Hours for Thursday, April 23rd. Hi, Destiny. Short plug at the beginning. Make sure you're following our Network Issues podcast, video podcast that is designed to talk about kind of the intersection between internet culture and marketing. And we're covering a lot more coming forward, and we're going to have some guests on the show moving forward too. So please follow that. And also follow this YouTube channel. So please subscribe. And moving forward, oh yeah, one more thing, follow newmediahomework.substack.com. Tomorrow I'll be posting my next piece about how we're living through medieval times. And I mean medieval times, like the most boring, odd form of fascistic time that we've ever been through. It's not exciting, and it's also very terrifying. So I'll be writing about that. As always, it's a mood booster, and it's worth reading. So today I'm going to talk about internet trends and some of the things that's actually been appearing online. There isn't that many. Internet trends aren't as common as they used to be, where you kind of go and like find out these flow of trends. Trends today are really about algorithmic exploits. And what I mean by that is that when people fall into an internet trend, whether that's a TikTok or an Instagram trend, what they're really doing is participating in an algorithmic boost. So you could take a piece of audio, like an audio meme, so it's a musical track, or a sound, and basically use that sound or that audio track, and you can reproduce it. And by making content with that type of audio loop, it helps you end up in the stream. So you basically participate in trends, and those trends can help you become more exposed, get more views. Obviously, advice I should be taking for myself, but I'm just not a trend person and never have been. So it's not something that I typically engage with. But there are trends that are out there, and there's usually like along the lines of like something that's a little bit more cheesy sometimes, like nostalgia bait. And then the weirdest trends that typically happen are like the trends where you see like the add yours on meta platforms, where you could always like see somebody participating in a trend, and then they basically have a little sticker that says add yours, which is your participation in that trend. The downside, of course, of those trends is there's a cynicism or conspiratorial mindset that comes with that makes people worry or wonder whether or not participating in that trend is actually data aggregation. And what I mean by that, and Des and I have talked about this on network issues, is that when you're using like a model of like, here's me in 2016 and here's another photo of me from 2026, your image isn't exactly like yours anymore. You're uploading it in a trend, which makes it part of the platform's property, which means that meta platforms and meta properties can actually use that data to analyze you. And so now what they do is they have a 10-year gap. They have you in a photo that you volunteered. You voluntarily uploaded that image, a 10-year adjustment on your age. So you can see you as in 2016 and 2026, and then basically it'll reconstruct your face, and that helps it understand how to do training data for later later, like we talked about last week, later when they install massive surveillance protocols that require training on how young people grow. So just, there's no 100% proof that that's what they're doing, but there's also not 100% proof that's not what they're doing. So it's just one of those things to remember when you're participating in any type of trend. There's two trends I want to talk about today. Two. One is cute and one is kind of funny. One is one that I get texted about. Now, it is funny, like whenever I get texted about any type of internet trend, I'm always like fascinated because I never know if I'm being baited by like somebody. I'm never sure if like what their intention is or what their politics are. I'm not really ever clear if somebody's like trying to get me to say something or side with something that's either confirming their confirmation bias or like going against it, and so they could have an argument with me. And so typically I'll get like a question from like a neighbor or a friend who's just like, "Hey, did you see this new trend? What do you think this is?" And usually that's a red flag for me. I'm like, "Oh, do we have to do this?" But this one was cute. Okay, I think it's cute. It's really cringe, but it's cute. And it's called sea lioning or the sea lion trend, which is just like a participatory IRL meme. And I just want to give some color to that, like explain why that's a trend, what it does, and why it is so fascinating to me. And it's because I think what I find consistently interesting is that as we go on the internet and the internet is like kind of growing in real time, we forget that like as we get older, as we're older users, like it's been almost 20 years, almost 2 decades since I started studying YouTube, which is crazy, which means that many of my students are younger or will be younger than this research that I started working on. Several of my students are younger than YouTube. So it is important for us to remember that as we get older, we have a memory of all of the memes and the internet as they grew and changed. But a lot of people have just no idea of how the original parts of the internet operated, especially anything that's pre-pandemic. So I'll start us off with this funny meme. It's cute. This is from the winter. Um, 6'7" on a Merry Christmas. And it's a cat meme. It's a little cat. All right. It's just funny because it's a low key funny how Gen Alpha being like kids right now, they're up to, well, they're not in college yet. They're young teenagers at this point. And the farthest end with that would probably be my kids. They'd be like, they'd be late Gen Alpha when I don't know what the generation is after that. My assumption is they'll call it Gen Beta, but I'm sure that's derogatory and they won't go by it. So who knows? But either way, Gen Alpha is recreating memes from first principles, like cat memes, little cats. Like, so uh, basically, it just is like, one of these funny ways, like looking at the idea that when people come across memetics or like meme creation and they don't know origin stories, they might just accidentally recreate those just because the structure is that's what it wants. And the internet is still made of cats, whether or not you want to know that or not, like the internet is just full of animals, cats, and everything. It's just the most common data, I guess, next to pornography, of something that's out there. And so when people find the idea of like making cats into content, it's just easy because cats are so they just don't give a shit. So like they're always funny on the internet because they're funny animals to like use in that context. Whereas dogs have a personality. Not to say cats don't. Okay, so any cat hater who's watching, a cat lover who's watching this, don't think I'm a cat hater. I like cats too. But dogs have like a personality and traits and like they could be a character on the internet as themselves. Whereas cats are kind of like obstinate. So it's like kind of funny that that's there. So sea lioning, I get this text saying, check out this new yeah, there's many people who believe dogs are better than cats. It's to each their own. I have had dogs and cats my whole life. I do miss my dog dearly. Oddly, this is just personal. I don't miss my cats that much. I did love them, but I don't miss them as much. So I don't know, it's whatever. Anyway, I get this text from a family neighbor, and he's like, "Hey, there's this new form of brain rot out there, this new meme that's going around, and it's called sea lioning or sea lion trend." And I was like, "Oh, I'd already seen it, but I already like didn't. It wasn't like impactful to me by any means. I'll show you it, but like there's not much to diagnose here, but I think there's something funny to think about when we see it. I guess this way to talk about it. Let's see, audio sharing on this. I hope so, but let's see. Everybody hit it with me, hit the sea lion! It seems pretty harmless. I don't think it doesn't seem like it's scary by any means. It's exactly what it sounds like. You basically do this sea lion pose and then you bop up and down like the worm and make the art noise that like sea lions make. And like, I know my kids love the idea of sea lions. They've seen them in real life when we went out to San Francisco and they thought they were funny. They're funny animals. They're like big wet dogs that like bark and they're like huge. And like it's an easy participatory meme. And then so this is like funny because it is similar to like a first principles meme, where it's like planking or owling or T-bowing. If you remember those types of memes, those memes were like basically derivatives of the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. And like we always talk about origin stories of like the internet and like where these memes come from, where trends come from. And somebody somewhere always has to start these trends. And really what there is what you're not looking out for is not the middle of the trend, but the beginning and the ends when you're doing any type of analysis of internet content. Because the middle is just the participatory moment. That's where everybody kind of like tries to do it. It's where the algorithm bites into it and tries to figure out whether it's shareable, whether it encourages other content, because that's the goal, really, is that it's going to create more content. The more content that can be created off of any type of media is always good for platforms. And so it's really nice to have those types of experiences. It's also good for like the idea of a flash mob, or any type of thing where people want to do something as a community, So having the sea lion one is like low risk. And it's also like something that you could just like share. This, to be honest, this specific trend reminds me more of like the Harlem Shake because it requires like somebody to start it and then other people like jump in and like try to be part of it. The Harlem Shake was very much a planned event. You had to actually create the plan. You had to bring people somewhere. Someone had to be wearing a mask, and then somebody had to do the is it Bauer dance? You know that guy, by the way, the DJ who made that track. He made millions off of that because I don't know if it was millions, but he made tons of money off that because people were using that sound and he was getting royalties off it just because that sound was like clocked in as monetized on YouTube. And so every time people were creating it, he was getting little dividends of money. But when these type of trends start, you kind of understand they start pretty much just somebody does it. And you've got to assume that on the internet, somebody's doing hundreds of these trends all the time. And some stick and some do not. And so it's kind of interesting to always watch when somebody's trend becomes sticky and becomes shareable. And so the sea lion trend is like one of those like stickier ones, but it is somewhat like cringe or it is something that's funny, but I find it completely like nice. It's nice every so often to get like a really nice, easy trend that like doesn't really hurt anybody. There's also, as far as I could tell, no asterisks on it. What I mean by an asterisk is some trends and some of them have like problematic backgrounds which you're participating in. And so that's kind of like internet literacies. So planking, for example, later it was accused that planking was like inappropriate because it simulated the way that like bodies were kept on boats as they're moved on the transatlantic slave routes. So it's kind of like, oops, there's an asterisk. There's also asterisks on content like poverty porn that would come from like like what is it called? Anton, what's his face when he did Hide Your Wife, Hide Your Kids. Like everybody was like making fun of that, but it's really like really a sad story. And then there's the woman who got bronchitis because her building burned down. Like those are funny videos, but like when you really start thinking about it, you're looking at people who are like kind of destitute and you're kind of making fun of them in those ways. Whereas it looks like to me like sea lioning is like just something to do. But to be clear, it is not brain rot. All right. It is a internet trend. It is not something that is made for content slop and regurgitative material. It is a trend, which is cute. Now, the better trend. Okay. So this is the trend that I'm like fascinated with right now. is Scientology runs. All right. So there's not too many people in here, but there's Scientology runs is such a fascinating trend right now. And it is one of those recreate memes based on first principles type of things. I'm not sure if anybody had heard of Scientology runs. Um, but basically, in essence, this is not a new trend by any means, but this is a more of a trend based on multiple memes tied together to do one act. Okay, so I'm gonna give some color for it. First, I'll show you what it looks like so you can see what a Scientology run looks like, I guess is the way to call it. We live in, man, but it's funny, like when I read these things and I talk about these things and I write these things down, it just sounds much better in my head. But when I start talking about them out loud, like everything just, it's very weird, you know, it's very weird. We live in weird times. Okay, let me bring this guy up here because it's a Vice article about Scientology runs. All right, so this is the article is what are Scientology runs and why is Gen Z so obsessed with them from April 10th. Okay, so it's a very recent article about this. And if you spent more than 10 minutes, 5 minutes on TikTok lately, you might see it. I don't know. It depends on your trend. You might think there's a nationwide movement of people sprinting into Scientology centers. People are artfully dodging and weaving around the strangely lackadaisical and rather stiff security, juking around stuffy staff members and trying their hardest to plunge to the depths of a pseudo holy house of religion to rack up as many social media validation points as they can. Cute writing there by Luis Prada. But let me just show you what these runs look like. This is the run. Give you some sound if it's possible.
Wow, it's nice in here.
Are you committing mistake? Okay, I gotta get out.
Okay, I'll leave.
Get out.
So you can hear there's sound effects that are attached to this too. Those aren't the actual sounds of them getting hit or anything. That's like the very online noises that come from that. The trend is very specifically easy to explain. Basically, you open the doors of one of these Scientology churches and you run in as fast and as far as you can with your cameras. Now, I don't particularly think this is one of the safest trends that's out there. This is technically private property. It's not something that you should probably do. It does cause copycats. It's very similar to devious licks to me. Devious licks was a trend during the return to school period, right during the pandemic when the masks were on. It was people like participating in basically vandalism, and it was like a viral trend that came from that. This is sort of a form of vandalism. It also can lead to some sort of damage and danger. So it's very important for like people who do this to kind of be very careful with that. Like it's a risk running into any place of private property. What I find fascinating about Scientology runs is the way that like it's attached to, again, first principles of internet culture. So here's what the writer writes. On one hand, this is very funny. On the other hand, however, it's still very funny. But also, maybe we shouldn't be running full speed into a house religion, no matter how hokey that religion may be, into a trend. Get it? Good cut. Yes, the whole enterprise is shady at best, and they believe in some weird space alien magic. They also have a history of harassing former members and anyone who dares pull back the veil on a secretive organization scare tactics. But maybe a better use of Scientology infiltration tactics would be an investigative piece rather than a viral speed run. And that's a true answer. Like, if you're really going to be doing this, like maybe it's probably best to actually do some expose work instead of expose the interiors work. I don't know. It is something that again, first principles thing. Okay, so Gen Z is weirdly obsessed with this. However, for those of you who know my work and know all the stuff we've been studying, when I first started my internet studies work, like in the very early days. So the very early days of me doing my internet culture research was all based on web television. It was all based on content that was being created, like simulating old media, but in a new media format. So that's like where the term new media even comes from. And in the background, while I was studying web television, this is back in 2008, and I had created a course called Web Television. It was one of the very earliest web TV courses in the country. I even created a web TV channel called HTVI, which was one of the very earliest college web television channels in the country. While I was doing that, in the background, internet culture was basically being developed from the ground up under what we would consider first principles. And in 2008, Tom Cruise did something very interesting. Tom Cruise, it's been, let's see, I could get the date on this. 20 years ago, it said today, it says, but this is last year. I want to see how I can find the date of this. But basically, it's about almost 21 years. I think in May of 21 years ago, May of 2005, I guess it is. Tom Cruise went on Oprah Winfrey show and expressed his love for Katie Holmes. And I'll share this, and then we'll reintroduce ourselves here. So this is the video, which is hilarious that I have it very easy. Anybody, literally anybody could see this video.
You ever felt this way before? You're gone. You are gone. This is the thing. This is the thing.
I'm gone.
Are you sleeping? Are you getting enough sleep?
No, I'm not.
No. Have you've never, listen to me. Let's focus here. Okay.
How do I stop this? You get the point in that. Cruise kind of like was a little too excited by his love of Katie Holmes and jumped on Oprah's couch, and it went viral, like extremely viral for 2008. There wasn't a lot of content in 2008. It's kind of like when I refer to like TV in the 1950s and there's like 4 channels. In the 2008, like you could pretty much just go viral for some random events like that. What ended up happening is Scientology, the Church of Scientology, requested that video in particular become removed from the internet. They did like strike down notices. And in very early days of YouTube pre-algorithm, this is just before the algorithm was installed. Well, their algorithm was there as like organization, but just before the AI parts of it, like the partner program was developed and everything, humans were basically in charge of curation and data. And so there was a lot of purging that went on, and the video was removed from the internet temporarily. You know, obviously I just found it on Instagram. And this created some sort of reaction on the internet. So again, let me just recap for everybody who's here. Thank you for being here. If you have any questions and you want to add them to the chat, I could definitely answer those if you want to talk about any of this or if you have any ideas on this. I'll be, I'm just talking about like the history of how we got to now pretty much and how these things are all connected. So the video gets removed, and something that happens is the beginning of what is later then called Project Chanology. Okay. And this is a real thing. This is in my book too. 2008, and it says hackers declare war on Scientologists amid claims of heavy-handed cruise control. Good headline writing, by the way. Actors video clip forced off YouTube, say activists. Churches hit by sabotage of website and day of protest. On one side, the Church of Scientology, it's crazy, right? Like it's crazy. We're doing these Scientology runs in 2026, and this story from 2028 is like almost like as if it could have been written yesterday. On one side is the Church of Scientology, freshly boosted off a $10 million donation from the actor Nancy Cartwright, the voice of Bart Simpson, Scientologist. Also, side note, one of the weirdest things you learn as an adult is like how normal Scientology is in Hollywood, and how much we didn't really talk about it until after Project Chanology. So after this article comes out. If you never saw the Leah Remini piece about her leaving Scientology, it's worth watching. It's also produced by a guy named Alex Werso, who appears in later documentaries about Scientology because they came after him too. He was a really great producer of some really great TV shows. He was a showrunner for Wife Swap as well. But it was he did Leah Remini's documentary. It was really good. On the other hand, is a self-styled church dismissed as a pathetic collection of computer geeks, a maverick band of hackers who have launched an online war against the organization. So the pathetic computer geeks are 4chan. All right, that's what they're talking about. It's 4chaners basically were really, really angry that Tom Cruise and Scientology had enough power to basically censor the internet and develop this new group called Anonymous. Went from the little a, Anonymous, is just how you reply on 4chan, to the big A, Anonymous, which became like a protest organization, a collective movement to protest things. And so when we look back at like how a lot of these movements of the past started, you have to look at like Scientology or their power as sort of like an origin story for a lot of this stuff. An anonymous, here it is, a capital A, an anonymous video posted on YouTube about the anti-Scientology campaign called Project Chanology has been watched more than 1.7 million times. Protest sites against Scientology have also proliferated. 2 Facebook groups have more than 3,500 members. That's hilarious. It's a lot at the time. A British organizer claims more than 1,000 people would join the UK demonstrations on February 10th, with protests also planned in dozens of cities. And it actually did happen, which is fascinating. Literally happened. It was, let's see if I can see the anonymous. Let's see if I can show you some images that became famous from that. There were, they're all fairly safe. I could bring this on screen. It's always a risk, and at least I'm on a stream here and not on my on the classrooms. Oftentimes it's a pretty big fear that at any moment I could show something that would definitely get me in trouble. But you can see the Guy Fawkes mask is being worn by the protesters here. You can see these is all protests against Scientology, believe it or not, which is like very amazing. Just can't fly, you know, like that type of note here. More Guy Fawkes masks. There was one where they raised a flag in a very humorous manner. They had signs that basically said, "Trust us, we're from the internet. Scientology destroys lives." You basically you understand the bit here, but it's the idea of anonymous, like, and it's Guy Fawkesian mask, comes from these types of weird and strange protests. As I've noted in my internet literacies books and projects, that anytime somebody participates with a Guy Fawkes mask, they're technically giving money to Warner Brothers. Okay, that is a Warner Brothers property. So anytime you are participating with that type of mask on, you're participating with Warner Brothers as the beneficiary of your protest. And so it is always like interesting. But anyway, what I find fascinating about these Scientology runs as a trend is that even today in 2026, the reason why they're doing this is because the group, the church, hasn't become less strange. They still do their recruitment tactics in subways. They're still fairly public. They're still a group that seems like is almost like ripe for infiltration. So when Gen Z comes across this, their interest in it is far more in the attempt at like disruption against this group. Whereas, like, as the article writer and Vice said, it's probably better to do an expose than it is to do these Scientology runs. And I agree with that too, because Scientology continues in 2026 to be exempt from taxes due to their status as a religion, which allows them to run organizations like Sea Org and run organizations that basically have some sort of influence in various places that we may or may not know about. I'm not saying they're fully dark money, but it is something that allows them some latitude of darkness. And also it is under the form of like a cult. If you wanted to join Scientology, it would require you to have some sort of financial status. From what we've read about in terms of like how Scientology lifts people in their levels, it is a cost thing. So that just reminds you of that. So you get like this idea of like Tom Cruise dancing on this couch. Cruise dancing on this couch.
Okay. You've never had this kind of feeling before, right? No, obviously not.
I honestly, I haven't.
50.
Really?
I'm not gonna pretend.
I can see you're not.
This is also, like,
You know,
his
Katie
relationship
once told
with
17 magazine. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Ready for this transition? So I'm not going to go fully long on this one because I'm writing about this tomorrow, but I just want to show like this idea of what kind of world we're living in. Okay. Speaking of people jumping on couches. Okay. So this is Alex Karp. Okay. This is Alex Karp talking to Andrew Ross Sarkin during the DealBook Summit. As you can see, he is, I'll just read from Dave Karp's blog here. Alex Karp looks like Taika Waititi after a 3-day bender. That's mean and petty of me to say. But if a billionaire is going to go full mask off fascist, then I'm going to be mean and petty. Okay. So Alex Karp, this guy who's doing his thing on this couch, is got a lot of criticism for this act. Like this, basically this very exuberant, I'll call it exuberant, but it could have been, there's no way to know what his real intention here was, whether or not he is blasted on some form of like Elon Musk's ketamine, or if he's just like, this is his excitement of it. But a lot of the response to it from the inside of Palantir was that he is neurodivergent and we should be celebrating this, not making fun of him. But on the other hand, Palantir, the company that he runs, and I don't say this lightly, evil is shit. Okay. It's so evil. So then there is like this thing of like, how do you want to like me to have any sympathy for this type of act or anything when the actions of the company are actually sort of brutal and disgusting. And then when you try to explain Palantir to anybody, people like just don't really click with it. They don't really vibe with the idea of like what Palantir is or what power it has in our society. And then on Tuesday, like I said, it's always Tuesdays that these terrible informations come out. On Tuesday, Palantir decided to drop what I would only consider a manifesto. Okay, that's how I'm going to describe it. It's a 22-point manifesto, or a 22-point summary, I guess is the way to think about it, that summarizes Alex Karp's book from last year called The Technological Republic. No one read that book. All right. It is a book that basically is Alex Karp's insane views about how techno-feudalism should operate in the world or the country. Techno-feudalism is a reduction of the citizenry of the United States or any statehood or any sovereign place into feudal-like aspects, which is there's a CEO of a country and everyone else is basically a land sharer of the feudal state. In other words, you lose your rights, and everything you do funnels upward to decentralized technology or technocracy that sits at the top. Not so far unlike a cult or some sort of like MLM structure. And those technocracies are something that's been celebrated by a lot of different people in the past, like Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, the president. All these people believe that there's, Curtis Yarvin, all these people believe that the US does not work well as a democracy. It would be better as a corporation. And so replacing a lot of our democracy with corporate status would be much more palatable to the billionaires, the billionaire class. Keep in mind, there's more billionaires now than there used to be, but there are only 3,000 billionaires by comparison to about 8 billion humans on Earth. So it is an extraordinarily teeny tiny group of people who have all this power. And those 3,000 people happen to have an accumulated wealth of more than, I think, 40% of everybody on the entire planet. So just those 3,000 people have that. So when you get a manifesto from a company like Palantir, a surveillance company made of multiple technologies that basically operate a control center of control, then you have this question of like, okay, why would you be sharing this type of manifesto anyway? Like, what are you losing? What world are you in that you feel like you need to express your power, even though you are power? The Verge did this really great piece called "We Translated the Palantir Manifesto for Actual Human Beings." For those of you who are Lord of the Rings fans, Palantir is from Lord of the Rings. I can't remember what it is at this point, but most of their hyper psychotic projects are named after Lord of the Rings things. Anduril Industries, Palmer Luckey's company. He's a Hawaiian shirt wearing weirdo who's just like a techno-fascist. When he developed the Oculus Rift way back when, it's about 2011, he developed it. And he basically just wanted to recreate virtual reality that was more consumer based. By 2014, Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg purchased it for several billion. And basically created the headset, the Oculus Rift headset that we now know. And then he developed the metaverse, which he launched in 2021 as a result of the Facebook papers coming out. And at that point, Palmer Luckey had already moved over to Anduril Industries. which is his basically murder drone company. Okay, it's anyway. While I was doing my dissertation on the VR history, I called this out. I called out that Palmer Luckey was like not a good guy, and I remember getting in a fight with his biographer, and the biographer was just like, "Oh, he's just trying to make like cool technologies." I was like, "This dude is a bad guy," and he's like, "You," and it was a big fight. The guy ended up blocking me, which is hilarious, by the way. I was right. You know, it's not hard to see when somebody's developing products and technologies that are like techno-fascist. You could almost assume like that's called fascism. All right. Now, speaking of that, here's this guy. Okay, and this is a guy who's fairly fascist. Palantir CEO Alex Karp is a man in charge of one of the most important and frightening companies in the world. Karp's new book, co-written with Nicholas Miska, is called The Technological Republic. After claiming, we get asked this a lot, Palantir posted a 22-point summary of the book that reads like a corporate manifesto. It evokes both weird and reactionary shit, and also trilby-wearing Reddit comments from the early 2010s. You can see they're still attached to first principles too. Palantir's summary of the book is ominous, but even if the company's name is unironically ominous, the Palantir crystal ball, there you go, there's some context. The Palantir crystal balls in the Lord of the Rings that let Middle-earth's worst tyrants spy on the heroes of the story. It's a fun reference if you have no shame about your company's mission. We've attempted to translate these 22 points from Alex Karp's alien words into something more reasonable, which is helpful. Like a human words from someone who might play him in a biopic. Hello, Taika Waititi, second reference. In so doing, we've become much more sympathetic of why Jürgen Habermas refused to supervise Karp's research. Habermas died recently. Okay, I'm not going to read all these because I don't have the time and nobody's going to be really interested in this, whether on a replay or not. But I just want to point out like 2 or 3 of them. And see how their translation works. Silicon Valley owes a moral debt to the country that made its rise possible. An engineering elite of Silicon Valley has affirmative obligation to participate in the defense of the nation. Translation. Silicon Valley has enormous opportunity to extract as much money from the federal government defense contracts as possible. To do this, we will bring back the draft for engineers. We're really into bringing back the draft. Deepfake teenagers, low-paid gig workers, and victims of the Rohingya genocide need not apply. So you can see they have an intention here, okay? Let me go down to some. Okay. Here's one. The limits of soft power, of soaring rhetoric alone, have been exposed. The ability of free and democratic societies to prevail requires something more than a moral appeal. It requires hard power, and hard power in this century will be built on software. Translation. Words and feelings are free, which is why we want to sell weapons. Nobody gets rich suing for peace. Trust a CEO who has studied the blade. This is a pretty cringe thing. Let's see if I can switch over to this. There we go. It didn't switch. Hang on. Oh, there it did. Okay. Very cringe Alex Karp with a sword. Fairly unclear why he did this, why he gave a tour with the sword, and why he's like next to this reporter who's like giving him softball questions as he plays with this sword. I just don't. I don't think about these things. Okay, anyway, let's go back to here. National service should be a universal duty. Okay, we should as a society, this is again back to techno-feudalism, seriously consider moving away from an all-volunteer force and only fight the next war if everyone shares the risk and the cost. Okay, so you know what that means. Basically, it's the draft. Okay, it's a mandatory draft. If you haven't seen Starship Troopers, you should see Starship Troopers because that's basically what he's talking about. In order to be a citizen, you have to serve. Okay, so like, do you want to learn more? You know, you basically become a citizen because you've served or you've defended. So that's basically what techno-feudalism looks like, or you just want to call it techno-fascism. It's fine. For example, if a U.S. Marine asks for a better rifle, we should try to build it. And the same goes for our software. We should, as a country, be capable of continuing a debate about the appropriateness of military action abroad while remaining unflinching in our commitment to those we have asked to step into harm's way. Sure, those wimps at Anthropic are selling an AI system they claim to have spotted cybersecurity vulnerabilities in every major operating system and web browser, but Pete, seriously, we will kill anybody you want with our software guns. So it's very, very blunt there. This one's the funniest. We should show far more grace toward those who have subjected themselves to public life. The eradication of any space for forgiveness, a jettisoning of any tolerance for the complexities and contradictions of the human psyche, may leave us with a cast of characters at the helm we will grow to regret. Translation. if you made fun of that video where our CEO, Alex Karp, looks like he's on cocaine, you're responsible for the rise of fascism. Also, we're going to be conveniently vague about what those who have subjected themselves to public life means, because be nicer to multimillionaires who go on podcasts doesn't have the same ring. When if you're complaining about it, the IT Renfelds of Doge, then you're anti-American. And if you don't remember where this comes from, it's because last year when Doge basically took over the US government, there was a lot of doxing that happened during that period. And there was a lot of pushback from the US government and from the techno-feudalists, which is like, how dare you expose these public professionals who are using your tax dollars to work? One of the weirdest things about working in the public space, including where I work, is that by working in the public, I'm not paid directly by tax dollars, but I'm paid by New York City. And New York City is I'm at a public institution. If I worked for the US government, I'm paid by tax dollars. It's a public institution. You're part of the public. In other words, you are, I don't want to say, the quote at Queens is, we serve, so we learn so we may serve. Like, we're of the service. Like, we serve based on the fact that we do this. So we're public servants. When Doge came in, they made this strange decision, this obsessive decision that they were private inside of the space, which makes really no sense whatsoever. So I think this particular comment is about them basically saying, like, when Alex Karp jumps on a couch like Tom Cruise in 2008, he's just being creative like that. He's just being creative. The psychological of modern politics led us astray. Those who look at political arena to nourish their soul and sense of self, who rely too heavily on their internal life, finding expression in people they may never meet, will be left disappointed. So translation: society must stop centering sensitive crybabies who want to feel personally validated by elected officials and filter their politics through emotional reactions. Also, I feel strongly that Zoran Mamdani is pagan who's going to wicker man me. You get the point of all this. This is very much like a very fascinating thing. This last piece I'll just show you here. They take all the positives and turn them into negatives. Here's one. No other country in the history of the world has advanced progressive values more than this one. It's probably pretty true. I'm sure there's some outliers, but it's fairly true. The United States is far from perfect, but it's easy to forget how much of the opportunity exists in this country for those who are not hereditary elites than in any other nation on the planet. Translation: we canceled our internal DEI programs, but we're fully prepared to steal valor from everyone in U.S. history who fought to make a more perfect union. And they did. Like, these are former Palantir groups that existed there: Palanqueer, Pal, Appy, Pal Noir. Like, they did exist. Anyway, I think everybody gets the point here. What I'm trying to say is that when we look at these techno manifestos, like, they don't really get covered in the mainstream by any means. Like, they're not something that, like, the news wants to talk about. It has a lot to do with the fact that the news is operated by people who make their money through the billionaire class and through finances that they can't. The news is not technically a public service anymore. It is a corporation service. It comes directly from corporate monies, corporations themselves, and they're housed within those entire environments. It's not to say they don't run independently. They do. They have newsrooms. They have editorial staff. They have people that will look out for the idea of telling stories without their attachment to the corporate bias that might be they're saddled on money. But there's also what Jon Stewart would reply to during the financial crisis is complicity by omission. And that means sometimes by not reporting on it, you're complicit in these acts. And so the lack of coverage of this manifesto or anything that, like, Palantir is doing, I wouldn't say is something that specifically fear or like a worry about how those systems actually operate. But it is one of those things where they don't want to deal with the flashback because, as we know from Peter Thiel, as he got really angry at Gawker's report on him, he helped fund Hulk Hogan's lawsuit against Gawker, which eventually Gawker had to shut down. Gawker did not have the money to support the lawsuits, and it basically ended the entire outlet just because the funding was there. So you can only imagine that anybody who's operating in these spaces, like, has to worry a little bit about this. So The Verge or Fast Company or anybody who basically wrote about this manifesto still has to add some snark into it to kind of give them the ability to have an out for it. Because otherwise, if you just wrote it as it is, when you say that this is basically what techno-fascism would look like, it's hard to understand. Techno-fascism is a still growing trend in our environment. It's attached to Silicon Valley and attached to the entirety of the globe and its AI development process. So it's an entire Earth project. And then it's also a race, a technological race that most humans don't participate in. Similar to the space race, the vast majority of human beings had no say in the space race, but we did have a centered goal of trying to reach outer space. It was very unique. AI, on the other hand, is a development process which is marketed as an end of the world tool, but is really just a tool of convenience or a tool of helpful grunt work. Like you can make the tool do what you need it to do, but they've added all these extra features to train it to do the race that you're participating in. You're participating in the AI race by using AI. It's just you're not going to get the benefits of the AI, whoever wins that AI race. If anything, you'll lose. You'll lose that because in the end, if they do reach what they would consider AGI, artificial general intelligence, you're going to end up in a place where you basically are subservient to some sort of rule-based system of a computer that you don't really get to participate in except for using it. You won't have any developmental process to it. So these types of things do worry me. And these things make me think about like how we have to understand like internet culture itself expresses itself in so many unique ways. In some ways it's cute and you see all these like videos of like people doing the sea lion thing and cringe and it's cute. And then you get these people who are, you know, kind of recreating memes from first principles and running into the Scientology thing, but they forget the reason it all started is because of corporate censorship, you know? And now we're like at a point where Palantir has the gall, like the actual gall to like post this manifesto as if it's like normal, like as if it's like we don't have to worry about that. And it really, I don't know, those types of things really make me kind of nervous, you know, for how we're rolling out a future of technocracy, is like how we're going to be ruled by these technologies. And like you have to remember too that, and one last note here so I can show you, is that companies like OpenAI and Palantir, any of them, they know how dangerous they are. And so what they do is they basically propose their own fix. OpenAI in this case has basically proposed its own regulation for itself, basically saying, you know, we'll regulate ourselves. You don't have to. But in doing so, they're basically creating the rule book. They're creating the future for what happens, you know, and it makes me nervous because this is happening so fast and so quickly. And we have a government can read these things and understand them. They, for the most part, aren't focused on the technology parts of the US government because they see technology as something else, as a tool, not as an immersive environment, a world that we walk in and a world that we participate in every single day. So it's just something that we have to constantly be thinking about. It does make you sound crazy though when you explain it to people. It really does. Like when I criticize AI or I criticize Palantir or I criticize whoever, it makes you sound like you're the person that has the problem, as if maybe you just don't like it because you don't know how to use it properly. You know, maybe you're the person that if you just took a class or two or like played with it a bit, you'd understand it a bit better. But in many ways, like you know, I don't know how to, I don't like pulling rank, but it's like, I have this set up because like they asked me to comment on this. This is my study. I've studied this shit. My diploma is crooked here. See, it's crooked, but it doesn't mean that it's not real. You know, this is what I study. It's just a matter of like, we need to make this, my biggest problem, of course, even on this office hours, is I speak at a higher level, an inaccessible level that should be accessible to the public. And it really means that people, it's up to you. It's up to people who understand this as like a danger to basically talk about it, turn it into conversation, make it something that friends and relatives and cousins and teenagers especially like understand as something that isn't just a threat, but is a change of our lives to something where we have less control and less agency. Media literacy is about increasing that agency. And that's why we have to increase our media literacies and all that. So that's all I have for today. We went from cool trends, fun little cute trends on the internet, like sea lioning, which isn't, again, just a reminder, it is not brain rot. It is a trend, a TikTok trend or an Instagram trend, to Scientology runs where young people are running as fast as they can into a Scientology church. They're all over the country. Again, not something I'd recommend. I don't think it's a good idea for people to be running into private property, regardless, even if it is a church. I just don't think it's a good idea. It creates a bad idea. And yes, tune in. Do me a favor when you're after this, go to the channel, wherever the buttons are, subscribe to the playlist Network Issues, and also subscribe to Network Issues on Instagram because that's where the clips go. That's network_issues_. And next week we will be talking about media literacy. And subscribe to my Substack, newmediahomework.substack.com, and I'll be talking about most of what we talked about today. We'll be talking about on my newsletter this week. And I think that's the plugs I have for now, but I do appreciate you watching. And next Thursday, 1 o'clock, every Thursday at 1 o'clock is office hours. And we'll be covering what I'll be covering in class next week. Thanks again.